In this video, we're going to take a closer look at the console view, its controls and how to set it up to suit individual workflow methods. I have a simple project with a MIDI track, audio track, simple instrument track and an instrument track. There's also some buses. All of them are named accordingly so the differences are easy to see. If you can't already see the console view in the multi-dock, select it from the view menu or by pressing Alt-2. I'm going to open the multi-dock by pressing D. And this is where the console view will open by default, but can be undocked and or floated if you wish. We should now be left with a full screen view of the console view, with perhaps just a control bar at the top. We can choose to hide that as well, of course, by pressing C. I'm going to use the strips menu to select buses and mains if they aren't already, and drag those out a little bit so we can see them all. My system has lots of mains, but we only need to see one, and we'll move the bus strip over as well. The number of mains you'll see obviously depends on your audio interface. These strips can all be narrowed by right-clicking over a non-modular area of a strip and selecting that as an option. And that works with quick grouping as well, so we could select 2 tracks for example, hold down the control key, select the narrow strip option and it narrows. Or alternatively, we can do them all at once from the strips menu by either selecting widen all strips or narrow all strips. Similar to the track view, we can also rearrange track order here. To do that, we need to hold down the Alt key while we click on a non-control area of the strip. The cursor will change to a double-headed arrow. As we start to move the cursor, the track will show a red outline and can be moved to a new position. One of the first things to notice here is it differs to many other views is that there's no timeline visible. This can make it more difficult to keep track of whereabouts we are in a project, but I'll be creating a screen set that allows us to see a timeline if we wish later. Tracks, buses and templates can be added here by right-clicking and selecting the required choice from the context menu. Obviously you need to be in the right pane to add buses. The modules menu controls which modules are visible. These are similar to the widgets in the track view, and unchecking them removes them from the display. I'm going to leave them all visible for now. We'll be using this menu later to tailor the way the CV looks, and I'll use it to set up a few screen sets that may help your workflow, or at least to give you some idea on how they can be used. Signal flow is from top to bottom, and the first control we come to at the top is the gain control. Note that on the MIDI track and the simple instrument track, this is actually a velocity trim. Access to the audio gain control on an instrument track is not possible. The track would need to be split and then reformed after the gain adjustment has been made. You can do this from the track view. On the bus strip, it's also joined by an input pan control as well. Next on the audio, the simple instrument track and buses, comes the Pro channel. The default view is a minimalistic one with only the preset manager, the post-pre-effects switch, a processing indicator and the global on-off switch and a miniature EQ plot visible. Note that the pre-post switch, when active, changes the signal flow so it routes through the effects bin first and then into the Pro channel, but it doesn't change the physical location of the module. Access to the full Pro channel is by clicking on the Open Pro channel button, and once again this is quick groupable so you can select tracks and open them all at once. It can also be assigned to a shortcut key. We'll be covering the Pro channel in more detail later. I'll hide the Pro channels for now. And next down is the effects bin. This is where effects can be added, accessed and deleted. We'll look at this in greater detail later. The effects bin on a simple instrument track is the audio type. The MIDI effects bin is accessed from the inspector. The audio instrument tracks and buses have their send module here, allowing us to control sends from here as we saw earlier. We looked at those in detail in the audio routing section. In place of the send module on the MIDI track is the channel, patch and bank selector controls, and these same controls for the simple instrument track are located in the track inspector. Common to all tracks and buses are the MSR controls, although the actual button content will vary by track type or if it's a bus. In the audio track and buses, we have the stereo interleave button used to control how audio is sent to effects. That's regardless of input source type. The phase button is an audio track only control for inverting phase of a track. That's for use if there are any phase issues at all. Read and write for automation control of those is present on all tracks and buses, as are the mute and solo buttons. The record button and input echo switch are only visible on tracks. Pan controls for stereo field placement are present on all strips, and precise edits are performed by pressing F2, while the pan control is the in-focus control. This allows us to enter numerics, and this will also work with the volume as well. Volume faders and meters are also on every track. The type of meter on display is dependent on function. Record and playback meters are automatically displayed depending whether the track is armed for recording or not. We looked at track meter options earlier, and they're set from the options menu in exactly the same way as we saw in the inspector and the recording section. These meter settings are screen set dependent, so it's quite possible to set different settings in each screen set. Beneath the meter display there will be a numeric value of the highest peak so far. If the project hasn't been played, as in this case, there will be no figure displayed. Directly beneath the fader is the current level of the track, either in decibels for audio tracks or from 0 to 127 for MIDI. Next down are the icons, which can be changed to suit your needs, simply by right-clicking on them or using the options that we looked at earlier in the view menus. Underneath these are the input-output indicator selectors. Clicking on them will reveal the choices available to you, and obviously that's dependent on your system. Next we have the track name, which can be whatever you want, then a sequential number, and there's no user control over that at all. Tracks are selected by clicking on this number, and a track can be put into focus by clicking elsewhere. Remember, there is a difference between in focus and selected, as we saw earlier. Finally, at the very bottom is the coloured WAI strip, which will only be visible if you have a control surface and you've chosen to show that option. There are further options for the strips in the options menu. You can choose whether to display 1 or 2 sends per strip, the EQ and plot resolution, whether the Pro channel works in compact EQ mode or not, and whether assignable controls for any effects in the effects bins are shown or not. The modules menu we've already seen. Next to that is the strips menu. Here we can filter which strips are visible and also widen and narrow them as we've seen. The track manager can also be accessed from here, and if you have keep track console visibility states in sync unchecked, will control the visible console view strips independently of the track view. We'll take a very brief look at the main out view. At the top there's a mute button to mute output. Either side of the meter are faders, one for the left channel and one for the right. And next to the mute button is a link button to link the two faders together. So let's have a look at setting up some screen sets. The first screen set I'm going to set up is a general purpose screen set where we can switch the console view in and out by pressing the D key. I keep this in my first screen set slot and call it Overview. Like any of the views in Sonar, they can all be tailored to suit you, so these are just to show you some of the views I find useful and perhaps get you thinking about the way that you might be able to use them in your own way of working. First, let's restore the console view down with the multi-dock docked at the bottom. That's done by pressing Shift D. Next, I'm going to make sure that the track view is scrolled all the way down, so the first track is at the top. I'm going to resize the track height so I have a good view of any clips that may be on the track. Then I'm going to check that auto zoom is switched on. Next, I'm going to hide the browser, and I'm going to do that by floating it and then closing it, which will hide it completely. Now I'm going to drag the top of the console view up until the top of it is butted up to the bottom of the first track. Click, hold and drag. Once we've got to the correct height, let go. Now you can adjust the modules visible on the console view to suit your needs. Now we can see a timeline at the top. When you click on a track in the console view, you'll see the corresponding track and its waveform in the track view strip at the top. You've probably noticed I used something similar for track selection in some of the previous videos. You can copy that to a spare screen set slot by pressing Ctrl plus the screen set number. That view will be available then whenever you want it by pressing the corresponding screen set number key. I also have a couple of simple screen sets set up that are handy for jumping between while mixing. I have these on screen set slots 4 and 5 respectively. I'll switch to 4 first. This is a track only view, and by pressing D I can bring up the console view, which again has tracks only, except for I have the master bus showing so I can keep an eye on output levels. Screen set 5 is very similar, except for its buses only in the console view. Collapse that down by pressing D, and its buses only in the tracks view. I also have a multi-send view. I keep that on screen set 6. As you can see, I can see multiple sends at the top, and I can switch between the tracks by switching at the bottom. The active track is always the one at the top. I created that by creating a sends preset from the track view manager that we saw earlier. I've then widened the track view similar to how I did earlier to show the timeline. I have the track view on auto zoom, so the active track always fills that. The only widget showing is the sends, and I can switch between them in the console view. It's very handy for controlling multiple sends, and perhaps you have a few ideas for screen sets of your own.